We are live. Hello, everybody. I see people hopping in here. Welcome. Welcome to our webinar slash conversation slash discussion and learning experience today with the incredible Billie Smith and Shannon Crow. We're really, really excited to bring this today. So thanks for joining us. And I'm going to move through my little slides before I hand it off to Shannon and Billie to take us through this. So if you've been at our webinars before, you will know me. And if you're new here, welcome. We are really glad to have you. My name is Sinead. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a yoga teacher. I live in Canada, in Calgary, Alberta, and I work as part of the Offering Tree team. So you'll often see me on these webinars. And while we're getting settled in, let me know that the chat is working. Just drop your name in the chat. Tell us, where are you and who do you support in your business? Oh man, I've got a typo in my slide. Who do you support in your business? Let us know. We're going to learn all about you throughout this call. We're really excited to know. It's always really cool to find out where people are tuning in from as well. And a little bit of housekeeping I have. You can drop your questions in the chat throughout. We'll get to your questions. The replay will come out later today via email. And stay tuned for some special offers and some more information on Shannon and Billie throughout the call. And finally, who are Offering Tree? I will let you know. Great question. We are a software, an all-in-one software. So it's a website, scheduling, booking, payment system, online membership, on-demand store, tangible items, digital items. I don't know. I feel like I could spend quite a long time listing all of our features now. We are for wellness professionals. So we've got yoga teachers, Pilates teachers, massage therapists, health coaches, all kinds of people in the software who use it for booking appointments and all the ways that they need to run their business. And we try and make it as simple as possible for you to run your business in a really effective way so you can focus on what you do best, and we focus on the tech stuff in the background. So that's who Offering Tree is. And in the webinar today, you get a special discount via Billie today just for being here, and I will share that in a little while. So without further ado, because you guys don't want to hear from me, I'm going to stop my share, hand it over to Billie and Shannon, and we'll check out the chat. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Sinead, and thank you to Offering Tree. I am super excited to be here to ask questions to Billie because we are friends. We've never met in person yet, but we will do that soon. And we talk a lot online, and I learn a lot from Billie. Billie, I'm so excited that we get to learn from you today. Do you want me to do a short intro to you, or would you rather you do your own short intro?
I'm happy either way. It's nice to be here also. Thank you everyone for being here. I could do my own intro unless you're excited to do one.
Let me share like as a friend. Well, in case people
Cute.
don't know, I should do my own intro as well.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
Shannon Crow, host of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, and I love Offering Tree and absolutely love learning from Billie as well as a friend, a human, and also as a yoga teacher who works at really making spaces inclusive. And one thing that I've learned is that Billie really like walks the talk here. So even in our conversations, just everyday conversations, I learn a lot. Billie focuses it in on like making yoga classes accessible, inclusive, safer, really specializes also in leading trauma-informed yoga classes. And really, I love also that you do this like rebel movement, that we're making sure that we're moving and that we're a rebel in spaces and really speaking up. And I appreciate all that so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I see that Claire is here from Nova Scotia, and Krisha is here from New Haven, Connecticut. I love that you're all putting it in the chat. So keep sharing in the chat and keep sharing questions as we go. And Sinead and I will keep an eye on questions, and Billy's got lots to share, so we'll dive right in. Billy, you tell me if I'm not asking the right questions here, or if I'm saying something where I could learn more. And I guess I would start with like, even the title of today's webinar is like, we use the word like queer inclusive teaching. And so there are some definitions, just like what do we call spaces where the queer community is feeling safer and included in it, and what are some of the terms that we might hear?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with you'll hear a couple of different acronyms. LGBTQ plus is one. I saw today someone refer to it as an evolving acronym, which I really like. There's a longer form. It's LGBTQQIP2SA plus. And I can go over what those are. There's quite a lot of terminology. I'm not going to define every single thing, but if there is one that I miss that you would like like a definition for, like let me know, pop it in the chat, whatever. So LGBTQIA plus is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning, asexual, and then the plus is meant to sort of include any other terminology folks might use for their gender or sexuality or physiological sex characteristics. The longer form is very similar. It's the same kind of foundation, but with some added. So it's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, pansexual, two-spirited, and asexual. And within both of those, there's definitely some terminology that is missing. There's several other longer forms or shorter forms. So you might see any sort of variation of that, like LGBTQ plus, LGBTQIA plus. You might see queer, like it like queer class, like queer yoga, that kind of thing. It's I wouldn't know, I don't know that necessarily interchangeable, because that really depends on the context, but in the context of creating safer spaces, it might be one or the other. So in terms of terminology, I'm not gonna, as I said, I won't go through everything because I have a feeling that you might know what some of them are. But again, as I said, just let me know if you have questions about some. Um, so queer, just because I have a feeling this might come up in a second, queer is sometimes used as an umbrella term that like all of the other letters of the alphabet, like in the acronym, are under. Does that make sense? So it's queer might be used by anybody who identifies with LGBTQIA plus, or it can also sometimes be used if someone isn't, either they don't really feel like they fit any of the terminology, they don't, like, none of them really seem to fit. Maybe they're not really sure, maybe they're not ready to define it yet. It's essentially someone that doesn't fit neatly into those. I kind of, neatly maybe is a bit of a weird way to put it, but those are some ways on how it's on how that word is used. And let's see, pansexual, or no, wait, did I skip one? Intersex is someone who is a medical definition for someone who is born with chromosomes, genitalia, or sexual characteristics of both male and female biological sex. Pansexual is someone who is attracted to others regardless of gender expression or gender identity or biological sex or biological property. Two-spirited there's a couple of definitions, and it's definitely a larger topic than just a simple definition, but it's a contemporary term chosen by and used by Indigenous people who identify as, I've seen it sometimes described as a third gender, but in other spaces, more so used, let's say it's a term that it's kind of nodding to the prior to colonial terms for gender. It was essentially someone who identifies as having masculine and feminine characteristics. It's definitely an interesting topic, and one that I would look into more if that is if you're still confused. There's other terms you might see: asexual, aromantic, gender fluid, gender queer, and then AFAB and AMAB. AFAB is assigned female at birth, and AMAB, AMAB, assigned male at birth. I don't know that I haven't really heard people say AMAB as much as saying AFAB. I don't know if people usually spell it out, so you might see one or the other of those. Is there any of those that you want any kind of expansion on?
No, I think that was a really good overview. I guess maybe just like I love how you said that the queer inclusive is like kind of an umbrella for all of this. And I just remember when this is like, I'm telling my age now, but when people were like, yeah, I'm queer, then I remember thinking, oh gosh, I thought we weren't supposed to say that. And I love how the queer community took that word back that used to be a slur and um, made it so it isn't.
Yeah, it's definitely a term that's being reclaimed. There are still some folks who might have difficult feelings about the word because of their own experiences or because of their history. But a lot of the LGBTQ plus community is reclaiming it. The one thing I will say about the word queer, and in general, any of these definitive terms, is using them as a noun versus a verb have different, or a noun versus an adjective, sorry. So you're using it as an adjective to describe a person, not like you wouldn't say a queer, or you would say a, a queer yoga teacher. You know what I mean? I don't know if you can sense the kind of difference between those two, but there's a big difference in the way you can use the terminology, and sticking with it being an adjective. It's a part of who someone is, not only is it not who they fully are, but also tends to have more of a slur connotation if you're using it as a noun.
Right. That
Mhm.
makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Like it's one part of someone. It'd be like saying like, here comes the brunette. That'd be weird. I don't want to
Yeah,
be called
exactly.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, and then the other thing I will just say about any of those, like any of that terminology, is that um, folks can change their minds at any point. It's not something you're like stuck with forever. And if someone does change their mind, especially if we're looking at it from like a teacher student um, relationship, it's not really our business um, unless we're close with them and it feels appropriate. So just kind of keeping in mind that a lot of this stuff, figuring out all of this stuff, maybe someone's history with their own sexuality or their own gender identity, is pretty emotional and can be quite difficult for some people. And for some people, it's not safe to talk about. So I know we're kind of jumping ahead, but one of the sort of tangible steps that you might implement is just being really aware of how sensitive this kind of thing can be. And if someone is taking the time to come out to you as queer or as non-binary or something, they might choose to explain or to provide insight into why they're deciding that, or why they're changing their mind, or why they are telling you, but it's not our business to ask. Does that make sense? I don't want to sound like rude, but it can feel quite jarring if someone is taking all the time to reflect on who they are as a person or how they identify, and then you might have the best intentions, but if you go, oh, why? Then it's not going to feel super inclusive.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I guess I feel like sometimes I have like wanted to put people in a box, but I feel like the more I've learned, it's more about um, if those definitions bring comfort to someone else. It's not about the heteronormative cis person being like, yeah, now I'll make this really concrete in my mind, this kind of another binary, basically.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, I wanted to, I know you're not asking this, but I
I'm
know that it might be helpful to talk about why this matters.
Yes, yeah.
Do want to preface this just by saying that some of the, I'm not going to, spend the rest of the webinar on this, but some of this stuff can be really like triggering and difficult to hear. So I just wanted to put a little, what do you call it? Trigger warning?
Hmm.
Disclaimer ahead of giving you some of these statistics. Um, so they're also a little bit difficult for me to read sometimes. So in queer folks, we're not, LGBTQ plus folks were not always very welcomed into yoga spaces, not until the late 20th, early 21st century. So it's not necessarily a big history. I'm not saying that there was not any queer safe spaces, but it wasn't a very broadly accepted thing. LGBTQIA plus folks are 4 times more likely to experience violence in their life. 50% of trans people have been sexually assaulted at least once. 90% of trans people, 90, have experienced harassment, mistreatment, and discrimination in their jobs. 53% of trans folks have been harassed in public spaces, like a public bathroom. Queer folks have more than double the rate of depression than heterosexual folks. Suicide is the leading cause of death for LGBTQIA folks ages 10 to 24. And LGBTQIA youth are more than 5 times likely to die by suicide than their heterosexual peers. Those aren't even all the statistics. I don't think I can read anymore just for my own emotional sake right now, but it's important that we create safer spaces and we learn how to create safer spaces, because this is the stuff that folks are having to face everywhere else. And not only is it important to dismantle anti-queer bias, but also people should be allowed to come into our spaces and feel safe in their own skin on their yoga mat. I'm getting a little more emotional than expected to, but I feel like maybe I already made the point, but it's, in a lot of cases, it's a matter of life and death if someone has a safe space where they can go and they can feel themselves, because they might not have that in other places. So I think it's really important to not only, you know, not only try to make some of these things or make some of these changes, but make a tangible effort on a continuing basis to not like to be queer safe, not just put like a rainbow flag on our doors.
Oh my gosh, I appreciate your emotion so much on this, Billie, because I know you care a lot. And that's why I'm so glad that our yoga teachers are here learning, because they also care. So talk to us about that, like that we're not just like putting a rainbow sticker up somewhere on our website or on our door of our studio, but we're actually making spaces inclusive, because we have seen that. We still see it. We see like businesses just putting a pride flag up or putting some, artwork that looks like, yeah, we support the queer community. But
Yeah,
what are the real things that
the
we can
real
do?
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a long list. I don't know if we'll get to every single thing, but I definitely have some that will take like not much time and not much money to implement. Um, the first one, which you may see in some of I can't see everyone's whole name in their chat, but is normalizing giving your pronouns. So it's like you can probably see in our names, it says our pronouns on our, I don't know if that part has a name, but anyway, on our screens. And I think some of you do too. I can just see ... in some cases. You might have your pronouns in your email signature, or if you're like talking to someone for the first time, you might, as a teacher, if you are a person who at the beginning of your class says, "Hi, my name is Billy. I'm guiding you through class today," whatever, you might say, "Hi, my name is Billy. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, and I'm guiding you through class today." Doesn't take a lot of time and it's pretty easy to implement. You might forget sometimes, and it's not really about being perfect. Like just before this call, for some reason it deleted all my pronouns out of my Zoom, and it's, random things happen that we have no control over, and sometimes we just forget. But just intending to do that more often can make a big change, just normalizing it and having it out there. And as I said, someone might change their pronouns, and that's fine too. This one I feel like you might have expected, but I'm going to talk about it in a bit of a deeper sense, is using gender neutral language. And it is things like not using the words guys and ladies, or I'm sure there's other ones I can't think of. But it's also in saying like people with periods or menstruating folks, or classes for if you have like a prenatal class, like for people who are pregnant or pregnant people, or birthing classes or prenatal classes for that matter, that are assuming that the relationships or that the people in your class are in heterosexual relationships, using that kind of terminology in that sense. Those last couple, any kinds of situations where you're assuming that all men have penises and all women have vaginas, which I can't think of any other examples of that, but other language would be like bra strap line, which is sometimes used as like a where to put a block kind of thing. So you might start to just consider, but like, because it's very individual, everyone has their own way of cueing through poses. Where does it come up in your teaching, and how does it impact your cueing? How do you use either gender or like bodily sex characteristics to help people go through postures? And what are other ways you can do them? If you can think of any other examples, you can feel free to pop them in the chat.
I
One
just
of
have
the
a
Yeah,
clarification question,
yeah,
Billy.
yeah.
So when you had said like for the like menstruating individuals, that would be like taking the gendered language out, would it be? Or is that part of the gendered language?
Um, with people who menstruate.
Yeah,
To me, it depends on the context, I guess, because
right.
I know that there's some poses where, and again, I'll give you an example. There's cobbler's pose is helpful for period cramps, and I've been in classes where the teacher will say, "Oh, hey, ladies, this period or this pose is good for period cramps," instead of saying, "Hey, for anyone who menstruates or experiences menstrual cramps, this pose is really helpful for them." So it's
That's a good clarification.
definitely depend on context. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah, feel free to. Because I know that there's the way that I'm thinking about some of these things might be entirely different than how you might hear them. So happy for questions. Um, One thing that I think is an interesting thing to talk about, and especially when we're talking about the context of yoga studios, is, and I can already feel like this one's going to be a little bit controversial. Masculine energy versus feminine energy. Because how often does that come up in spaces?
Yeah, it still does.
It still does. Thank you, Grisha.
Someone's like,
Um,
thank you for going here. That's so
yeah,
fun.
yeah. I had a couple conversations with a couple of non-binary friends of mine coming up to this, just to ask their opinions. And I'm just going to say, first of all, like this is my opinion, this particular thing. And my opinion is not the right opinion, right? You know what I mean? Everyone has their own perspectives. But in my own opinion, if we have the choice of being inclusive versus non-inclusive, I'm always going to try to choose the inclusive approach. Oftentimes, masculine and feminine energies are used. Like, think about what you mean when you are trying to say, for example, feminine energy. What does that mean? Sometimes it means things like, oh, what's the word? Like feminine, or sorry, soft, gentle, whatever. And sometimes when you're thinking masculine energy, you're thinking strong, courageous, assertive. And I think we should just use those words. Like, I think I don't, to me, as a person who's non-binary, and again, just my experience, if something is listed as like feminine, whatever, I immediately feel not included. Like I immediately am like, oh, not for me. There's a way of wording it to be more inclusive, and it's going to be different depending on what you're doing and what the message is, what you're trying to create. But I would say in every context you can try to elaborate a little bit more, because it'll, in my opinion, it'll make a little bit more sense, because often when we're saying masculine and feminine energies, it is a very stereotypical context. Any thoughts or questions on that? Because I know that one feels like a big controversial subject.
I'm so glad that you brought it up, because I've been in many yoga spaces where that's part of the discussion, is like masculine versus feminine energies. And so I think that's I think what you said, if I'm going for like inclusive versus non-inclusive, I'm going to lean that way, and that we can just look at those qualities. I wonder if anybody wants to pop in the chat, like if you have more questions about it, because that's a good one. Okay, so we're going to try and take out gendered language. We're going to try and share pronouns and include them wherever we can. I just realized that I forgot to do that at the beginning of my intro. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Mine are they, them, she, her.
You did it, and Sinead did it.
Oh, did I? Okay, cool.
I think you did. Well, let's ask about that, because I feel like that was a big learning for me the first time I met someone who had not just like she, her, or they, them. Then I was like, wait, I feel like I'm missing something here.
It's definitely an individual thing. Personally, means that I'm fine with any of those. But I really do like when people use the word they, like people use they, them for me, but I am also okay with she, her. In some cases, often it means that the person is fine with going by, for in this case, by they, them, or by she, her. You can use them interchangeably, which usually ends up feeling a little bit more supportive to the other person. But sometimes people, just in my experience, I've had some friends who've kind of done that. And the reason they use she, her sometimes is because they don't want to have the conversation every single time they're out in public and someone says, oh, like the she, her, like, I don't know, I can't think of an example now. Oh, this is her coffee, you can give it to her now. Like, so sometimes people literally have it in there for that reason, and they would prefer to go by they, them. So if it's someone that you know, or if feels appropriate in the moment, you might ask, oh, do you have a preference, or is either one fine? Yeah, that's a good question. I do have some other steps, but I know that we've already kind of done a lot, and I want to make sure we have enough time to get to any of the questions that might come up around that. I feel okay so far to do more?
Keep popping your questions in the chat if you want.
All right. On waivers, I think I'm going to take a guess and say most people have waivers in this space. Not just having male and female on it. Sometimes you have to, name, like date of birth, whatever, not just having male, female. And I will also say some people who are non-binary really don't like having to identify as other. Doesn't feel super inclusive. It feels a little bit odd, to put it in in a minimized way. So you might even just have a space to add to add your own, or you might have male, female, non-binary, other space. There's like several different ways. It kind of depends on what you're using for your not your webinar. What do you call it? Or I just use the word
waiver.
Thank you. There we go. Also, bonus points if you have a space for pronouns, because even if it's you don't have a lot of options, for example, with gender, so having pronouns immediately feels like, oh, thank goodness, like this is a safer, like this is a space that gets it. Degendering bathrooms, or having a gender neutral option. And I know that this can be a really big conversation. I feel free to ask questions. But even someone told me recently that they at their studio put he, him, they, them, she, her, they, them, or even I've seen them. I don't know if you've seen the words are escaping me. The little signs that say he, him, she, her, I don't care, just wash your hands. Like I like got
Right.
so excited the first time I saw one of those. I was like, oh, I'm coming back here immediately. Like it just feels really helpful. You might have a gender neutral option if you don't, for some reason, say you're like teaching at a studio and you don't have the ability to make the physical changes yet, you might opt for a gender neutral option. And you, in that case, you just want to make sure that there is a space for them to get water or something that's not necessarily in one of the gendered rooms. You know what I mean? Like that, so that they can still access water if there's not one in the gender neutral option, at least have water outside of the room. In general, I would say when it comes to most things, just not assuming anything, like not assuming that everyone who presents as a woman has a period or has a straight, like that not everyone you see as a straight relationship. And sometimes this looks like if you have a new student to class, into your space and they have their gender expression, so sorry, so many things in my head for today's thing. I forgot all the words. So many, like that they're publicly expressing their gender as male. They might not have, that might not be their gender identity, but if there is someone who appears male doing like an intro with you, not assuming that they're going to be using the men's bathroom, to like pointing out both in that example, or just saying like bathrooms are down the hall. There's a lot of different situations that can come up depending on what kind of space you're working in. But just kind of being mindful and doing a little bit of that reflection of where that comes out or where that might come up within your student's experience and your experience with the student. In general, I would say it's always good to have a trauma-informed approach to any kind of hands-on or touch within the space, which is a whole other topic, but it looks like a lot of talk around consent. It can feel, there's so many reasons that it might not feel comfortable for someone who identifies as queer, and just making sure that you are having that communication in a way where they have their bodily autonomy, they have a way to say no and to change their mind. And that might look like no hands-on, or it might look like the consent cards, or that's a bigger conversation. But just keeping that in mind, and this is another bigger topic, which is not something we can really go into necessarily, but you might keep in mind how someone who has just been through a recent gender affirming surgery might be affected in your practice. In some cases, it looks like a little bit like limited mobility with their arms, that kind of thing. I can take a pause in case there's any questions, because I know that's a lot of stuff. We're just sort of rapid firing, but
This is great. If anyone has questions about this is perfect. And if you're starting to feel like, oh gosh, how would I share yoga like with someone who had gender affirming surgery? You know what? It's the same as like, how would I share yoga if someone had like their knee operated on? You don't have to know, they know their movement. And if they share it with you and say, like, I had this recent surgery, you can just ask them questions like, what movements can't you do? Or like, if you want my help modifying something, you can like wave at me. I'm happy to do that.
yeah.
Yeah, this is all a lot of great information, Billie. Can you think of some of the things that, well, you gave some examples of like, here's where harm can be caused in a yoga class, like even saying like, okay, put this block at your bra line. Like, I feel like there's a lot of people, like some people don't want to wear bras, if there's people who have never worn a bra in their entire life, like it's not even part of their, you know, yeah, then we are excluding people. Are there any other things where you feel like, gosh, I wish yoga teachers would stop saying this?
I think in general, where I've seen it come up most is in greetings. If you come in and they like, "Hey, ladies," or "Hey, girl," um, it's like the experience of someone who's, for example, non-binary coming into a space and saying, like, hearing, "Oh, hey, girl, how's it going? Welcome to class. Here's where the women's change room is," whatever. Um, versus saying, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" Like immediately is a little bit better. Um, that's a good question. There's a question. Sorry, I guess you should be reading it. I'm just too excited about talking about this stuff.
This is really good. I like this. Okay, we'll come back to this part. How would you correct if you made a verbal slip, like put a block at your bra line? Would you move on or apologize, or does it depend?
I would say it depends. And it depends on the teacher because I think some teachers could make that mistake and make like a lighthearted joke and then move on. Like, oh, not I can't I'm not the teacher that could make that joke because I get too excited about things and I can't think of any words in the moment. But some people definitely could. But I think if it's a situation where it's something like um misgendering somebody or assuming, like saying, for example, "Hey, ladies," or "Hey, girl," or whatever, you might say, "Oh, sorry, hi, how's it going?" Or you might use a different word. Um, and then moving on. That's a very good question. Um, I would say if it's a situation where it feels like it might cause harm to somebody in the room, apologizing for it and then moving on. Um, is a helpful way to go. You might also just invite feedback too, which I know can sometimes feel kind of nerve-wracking, but um, it can be a really helpful way of hearing places where you might be, say, using terminology that other folks are finding harmful. And it can be a really helpful way of learning in those situations. I would just say, whether you're apologizing and you made a slip or someone has brought something to you, I would say do your very, very best to, I know this isn't your question, but I think it's an important thing to touch on. Do your very best to stay grounded. And I'm not saying to don't not have your feelings, but just like pause them for a little bit so that you can stay in the conversation and hear the person out or make the apology. And then responding with something, again centering the conversation around them, so hearing their experience, apologizing, say, I'll try not to say that again, or I know this can be harmful to say that, or I know not everyone knows where a bra line is, so I'll try not to say that again. And then giving there space for the other person to either have a conversation with you if it feels helpful for them, or to say what might be helpful for repairing in the future. And then once you've had that conversation, then have your feelings either, on your own time or with a friend, whatever. Um, just making sure that you're not making it the person who has been harmed's job to help you feel better. And I think in the same vein, being aware of who you might be bringing your feelings to. If you have a friend who's, um, for example, who's non-binary and you've slipped up and said girls, and they might not have the space to help you with that feeling right then. Does that make sense?
So good.
Yeah.
Such a good question as well. And I love that we can, um, let's say you say, "Hey, girls," and then you stop yourself and say, like, "Oh my gosh, I'm really trying to stop saying that because it's actually not an inclusive way to be addressing a group of people." And so you can say, like, "Can you catch me when I do that?" Like, just wave a hand, like, yeah. My big one still, I still catch myself is like, "Hi, guys," because I say it literally for a group of any people, and it's a real habit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we definitely, I mean, like we might have a certain way that we're intending a certain word. And not everyone we're speaking to is going to have that same definition of the word. Um, there are definitely spaces where if you're with friends and you've all sort of made it clear that you don't care or you like the word guys or whatever, in that case, like whatever, I will say that that tends to make it harder to not use the use that word in other spaces for sure. But mistakes definitely do happen, and I think we can get kind of stuck in our head about it. Um, Especially if it's new, or if it's something that you're not necessarily new, but you're kind of learning more about, it can feel kind of daunting. Um, because slip ups happen as I've demonstrated. But it's I mean, I'm not going to say every single time it's not as big of a deal as we think, because I can't predict every time there might be a slip up, but in a lot of cases, just having the accountability of, saying, oh, sorry, I'm trying to stop using that word. And maybe you have another word that you go to. I tried to switch to the word folks, and now I say that so much that I mean, it kind of annoys myself sometimes, but it switched over. So depending on the person, it might be helpful to just pick one, or I know some people like to just kind of, you can Google gender neutral ways of greeting groups, and some of the words are honestly so cute. There's lots of options if you're stuck.
Yeah. Like, hey, friends is a great way to
Yeah.
say it as well. I know that someone did a post in the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. Like, we're tens of thousands of yoga teachers in there, and was like, hi, ladies, blah, blah, blah. And I private messaged them. I was like, not only are there men and women yoga teachers, but also like there's non-binary, and like we're looking at the entire, like being inclusive in our language. And this person was like, well, it's mostly women. And I was like, right, statistically it is, but then you've just excluded a lot of people. And so we're
Mhm,
working hard to do that. Yeah.
for sure. And so something is um, that can come up is that, so personally, I identify as non-binary and also pansexual, but I identify as non-binary, and I am identify as a woman. I don't like the I don't like the word ladies or girls. So that might, not that that will really come up, I don't think, with most students. I guess if it's a one-on-one, but then you have a little bit more space to do that. But anyway, one of the things that I've noticed in having, like, letting my friends know about my preferred language, as a lot of people who are cis, so they identify as um, the sex they were assigned at birth, so they were born um, female and identify as female, a lot of them don't like the word ladies. Most of my friends, I don't know if it's just my friends or what, but there's definitely just some words that, whether or not it has anything to do with gender identity, that are immediately like a immediate no for a lot of people.
Mine of that is like, hi, hello, ma'am. I'm just like, no,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
not working
Yeah.
here for me at all. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very fair. I feel like that's a pretty common one too. It feels common to me.
And so what I'm hearing you say is it's really important that we find out for an individual, especially if they're a friend of ours, like what language feels
Mhm.
good for them. And like you said, one-on-one teaching. And if we're teaching a group class, we might not get into all of this, but it's very individual.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very individual. In a lot of cases, it is. And I think that the safer bet is to opt for the most neutral language. And then as you get to know your students, you can adjust, if you have this style of class, or say you have the same students every single week, then you might adapt, you might change it a little bit. But especially when we are meeting a bunch of new students, or we're putting it out on our social media, opting for the most neutral language and neutral language and inclusive approach, which also includes having representation, but it not being just on, like, in Pride Month kind of thing. Like that comes back to not just putting a rainbow sticker. Part of that is like training your staff or having queer inclusive trainings, um, of doing the work of not just, if you put out a post saying like, hey, anyone who's queer, let us know how we can do better. Like there's a difference between that and then you doing the work of, paying someone who does queer trainings or inclusivity work to help train you. And just being mindful of why you're posting something. Like if you're posting something to do with queer students, are you posting it because it's Pride Month, or do you have, like, are you posting it for inclusivity? In which case, like, what else are you doing in your space other than just this post and the rainbow flag on your door? Like doing a lot of the reflection work too.
Yeah. Someone posted a question. I'll get to that in a moment, but I did want to say while we're on this, you have a training coming up. Now is a good time to chat about it. I think it's in January. Is that right? Can you share the
Yeah,
details with us?
January 20th, 10 a.m. Eastern till 4, I think. It's Eastern, but it is recorded. So if you miss it, there'll be a replay. It's 5 continuing education hours and it's done per individual. However, if you are looking to hire, like, say, for example, hire someone to come in and teach all of your teachers, I can do that as well. It's just sort of a separate setup. And it's essentially a lot of the stuff we're learning today, but a very expanded version. A lot more steps, a lot more information. And one of my favorite components of it is a bit of a discussion, um, which is just such a nice. It was one of my favorite things I did in my last inclusivity training. But yeah, it's January 20th.
Amazing. Okay, so one of the people who's here said, my son is 17 and trans, and it seems the language he uses amongst friends is different than what cis people should use. Is that true for other queer communities? Just curious.
It can be. It kind of depends on someone's um, safety and comfort level. Like there's some cases where someone might like their pronouns, for example, or the language they use might be something with their close friends, but they're not either. It's not safe for them to have to come sorry, to use that language with um, outside folks, like, people in the studio or whoever they interact with. They might not feel safe, or they might not be ready for it, or they might just not feel comfortable with it yet. It definitely is, it can be true for sure. And I think well, in a lot of cases, either they will let you know, or maybe they will say, there might be an example of someone, for example, like going by he, him when you meet them, and then a little while later, um, maybe they go by they, them. Like there might be like in having the opportunity for folks to introduce with their pronouns gives them the space to change them, and and going with an option that feels the more inclusive option or the more neutral option gives a little bit of space for that, any kind of change, or I don't know how else to put it, for any of the, like, this sort of development feels like a weird way of explaining it, but it works. Give space for the development to happen, because maybe they won't ever go use the same language that they do with their friends in public, or maybe 5 years, 2 years, a week from now they might. It really depends on the space and the person.
One other thing about pronouns that I learned just from going to workshops like yours is that we can't, it's not always safe for people, like you said, to share their pronouns. So giving people the option if they want to, like, do you feel safe adding your pronouns into your, like, with your name there, or having that on our forms, or like not forcing everyone to share their pronouns. And then the other thing I've bumped into is like, it'll be like, share your pronouns, and then someone's like, I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know. And so being really I don't know what the word is, like inclusive for the person who hasn't learned about pronouns, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah,
Yeah. That's a very good point of making it optional, not a
yeah,
required thing. Yeah.
yeah.
And I know that some folks do waivers on paper, so it's not, you can't, it's not as easy to, go through the files and find it, but it might be helpful to have it as an option for them to change them later on. Like if it's set up with like a profile on your website, for example, it might be helpful for them to be able to go and change them if they want to, or add them in if they want to. I know
Mhm.
pronouns is just one example, but same thing for changing their name. Um, or if for some reason I don't know that this is necessarily applicable to everybody, but I'll say it just in case it is. Um, Having an option for if you need to know their legal name, you might put legal name and then preferred name or name to be called, because those are not always the same thing.
Right. Maybe in a medical setting more so than a yoga
Yeah.
setting.
Yeah, I think more so medical settings, or if you take insurance, if you're someone who does, I don't know, but
Yeah.
I just thought
I
to put
always
that
think
there.
like, is this question really something that I need to put on my waiver just because it was on someone else's waiver? Is
Yeah.
going to like, will this ever be needed? Pronouns is needed for me.
Hmm.
When I host podcasts, I want to be using people's proper pronouns. I don't want to be using the wrong pronouns when I do an introduction.
Hmm.
Krisha is saying the facilitated discussion the last time that you did this training was such a great enrichment of all you taught. So I love
Yeah, it
that
was very
feedback.
nice. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from people who are here? Like, don't be afraid to ask
Hmm.
questions. This is the space for it. Um, you know, yeah, trainings like this. What other resources, Billie? So your training is where people can learn. Are there other resources that have been really helpful for you?
Oh, for sure. There's so many. I have some on my website so it's movewithbilly.com. I think it's under more resources. Oh,
Oh,
look at you. There we
she's
go.
doing that.
Sinead is on it. I do have a podcast, which I always forget to say for some reason. And we have, I can't remember how many episodes now that are about queer inclusivity. There's at least five, probably more than that. Tristan Katz is someone who I have learned from and is very helpful. I think they also might be part of this community. Um, oh, there's so many. It's hard to. I'm trying to think of the person. There's a lot, and it's not hard to find them if you know what to search for. If you just, I feel maybe this is just me, but I feel like anytime you start to go into inclusivity work and you're really expanding that in all of these spaces you interact with. So, say for example, you start on your personal Instagram. If you're only following um, like straight cis folks, start to follow queer folks. And from there, you will probably find lots of people doing this work. There's lots and lots of spaces um, to search that for, or just to learn more. I'm just trying to think of the person who I was trying to think of changed their website, and I don't know if I know what it is.
I love how you said like we can follow like people from the LGBTQIA plus community. That's what I did after a workshop that I took. And it's amazing the things that you can learn like with a little reel of like, okay, if you used to say this, try changing it over to this. Or here's one
Mhm.
example of like how this isn't helpful. And I also love how you pointed out that this is like to the extreme life-saving. This is a life-saving skill that we can all have as humans walking around the planet, not even just as yoga teachers. But if we're yoga teachers, like part of the philosophy is ahimsa, and that means non-harming. And so we really are looking at how can I not be causing harm
Mhm.
as a yoga teacher as much as
Yeah,
possible. We're humans too who make mistakes.
yeah, absolutely. I found their Instagram. Can't find the website, but that's the Instagram. Heart at trans yoga teacher. I don't know if that works
No
or not
way.
still.
Okay. Trans yoga
Um,
teacher. Okay.
I don't know if he still offers it, but he did have a teaching transforming yoga training years ago. I have no idea if it's still an offering of his, but that is one other option. And then I try to expand my resources on my website as much as I can. Um, if anyone has other resources, you're welcome to share them in the chat here too.
This is great. So your workshop in January. Also, if people want to find you, it's movewithbillie.com and resources on there. This is amazing. Any other questions for people who are here live? Thanks for being here live. I think it's really great to see so many people. Oh yes, Sinead, thank you for the reminder. Also, you can get, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I love this, and I also want to check out Offering Tree, I highly recommend it. I use Offering Tree for my own business because it keeps everything organized. And there's a code that will get you a discount, and it's Billie's code. So it's offeringtree.com/Billie, BILLIE. That'll get you 15% off for the annual plan or 50% off for your first 3 months. If you're thinking about building a website or you want to book people in. Billie and I both use Offering Tree, and yeah, it helps us in our business
Yeah,
because
for sure.
running a yoga business is challenging.
It is. Yeah. I used to have like 3 or 4 different subscriptions to 3 or 4 different places to try and, newsletter and whatever. And now it's just one through Offering Tree, which is helpful for anyone who's a business owner, I feel like in general, but also folks who have many different areas they want to explore.
Also, Billie and I both have podcasts. So if you feel like you want to hang out with us more, sometimes we talk on each other's podcasts as well. We talk with each other. Billie, what's your podcast?
It's Rebel Movement Podcast in most places that you can listen, but definitely on the main like Spotify and Apple, and I don't know if Google Podcast is still a thing, but Rebel Movement Podcast.
All right.
Mhm.
Mine is the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. And I would love to hear more feedback. I actually had a question as I was talking, and this is the place to ask it. I used the term heteronormative, and then I was like, is that wrong to say? It
Depends on the
sounds
context.
okay. I love that you
Yeah.
said
I feel like I did a training. I took a training a while ago, and the teacher always kept saying, it depends. And I remember being like, oh, this is so,
that.
I need straight answers or like definitive answers, but it's definitely not a possibility. You can't always know all the circumstances, but in a lot of circumstances, heteronormative is definitely a appropriate word, because it is, in general, we do live in a heteronormative society where that's shifting for sure, but yeah, that's a word that is generally okay to use.
Right. I was wondering because it was kind of like, well, is this really the norm?
Mm.
Like
Oh yeah, that's
discussion.
fair. And I think that's a good discussion, because it may not, we may not want it to be the normal, but it is important to acknowledge the bias and the harm that queer folks historically have faced, um, from being in a heteronormative society.
As we close out here, I would like to ask you, and I'm putting you on the spot here. I did not tell you that I was going to ask you. If there's been a time that you can think of, don't worry, I'm going to share a quick story where I feel like I think it made a difference. But if there's been a time in your life where you just like walked into a space or talked with a person where you felt like, I am looked after and safe and included in this, does something pop into your mind right away?
Usually speaking with you, to be honest with you, it's the first thing that came to
Oh,
mind. But in general, if I don't know if it's honestly happened that many times in movement spaces so far, partially in part because of, well, the last however many years, 4 years, the chaos of the last 4 years. But um, if I've been to a space where the bathroom says, so like it's a gender neutral bathroom, immediately excited, like immediately feel safer. If the languaging is generally not super gendered. I usually feel safer. And just if anyone who is coming to this work with a genuine sense of curiosity and like compassion, not to get like the stamp of approval, but you genuinely want to help people feel safer. Um, if that's where your heart is, it doesn't, the mistakes are like a drop in the bucket. And if your heart is in the place where you are compassionate, you want people to feel really safe in your space, or move coming to your website or whatever, if that's what you're like, if that's why you're doing this work, then that shows through. That shows through in conversation. It shows through in your space. You can feel it. It feels safer. That's a very broad answer, but yeah.
I love that it makes a difference. I'll share quick that there is a kid who is in my neighborhood who I know is a trans kid and whose parents don't support that. And I know how devastating that can be for kids, if to feel not supported at all and with parents. And so I was out in my garden working and I had a big like pride flag on my shirt. Or I didn't even think of it. It's just one of my shirts that I wear. And this kid was walking by and just like looked up, was kind of down, looked up, and then this huge smile. And I was like, hi, like used their name that their parents refused to use. And then I realized, oh, it's my shirt. It was my shirt that like made this kid like light up for a moment, not me.
Maybe both. Because as I said, the mean, like the intention behind them is the
Yeah.
main
Yeah.
thing. But it's amazing how using pronouns and name that they prefer they make a huge difference in how safe someone can feel.
Yeah. So for the yoga teachers that are supporting um, inclusivity in your classes or supporting, like we had someone say, like their child or a neighbor or whoever, thanks for doing this work and keep asking the questions. Keep supporting people like Billie who are doing this work. Thank you so much for doing this, Billie. Thank you also, Sinead, for hosting us here. Thank you to Offering Tree. Uh, oh, yeah. One person said here, it's like the old neighborhood watch stickers people used to put on their doors. That child knows they're safe with you now.
That's so cute.
So true.
True.
I love that. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for having this conversation.
Thank you both. This has been awesome. Thank you. We really appreciate you guys coming here. And sorry, no, not you guys, you both, folks, friends,
I love that.
coming here
Good job. Yeah.
and sharing this. It's such an important conversation. It's a really important conversation to Offering Tree, and you are both very important to us too and to our community.
Aw.
So we appreciate this, and thank you for the work that you put into this, Billie. It's
Thank
incredible.
you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.